Charlotte, thank you for that in North London. 2 of the seats there going to Labour.
One of them, Margaret Thatcher's seat, now in Labour's hand. Now, it's almost 6 o'clock in the morning. Time to take a breath, catch up on the headlines. Let's have a roundup of the latest news. Let's check in with Charlie State.
Good morning. It's Friday, the 5th of July. The Labour Party has won a landslide victory in the general election, with the Conservatives on course for the worst result in their history. Rishi Sunak conceded defeat, congratulating the next Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer. The Liberal Democrats and Reform Party have made gains, but there have been significant losses for the SNP. Our political correspondent Damien Grammaticus reports.
A moment of history and, finally, a smile from Sir Keir Starmer as the scale of his personal and political achievement became clear, taking Labour from historic low to landslide. And all in just 4 years, a feat applauded by his wife.
Because tonight people here and around the country have spoken, and they're ready for change, to end the politics of performance, a return to politics as public service. The change begins right here, because this is your democracy, your community and your future.
And a little before 5 in the morning, Rishi Sunak, re-elected, but his party facing its worst ever election result, conceded.
The Labour Party has won this general election, and I have called Sir Keir Starmer to congratulate him on his victory. Today, power will change hands in a peaceful and orderly manner, with goodwill on all sides.
Elected.
The first senior Tory to go was just after midnight. Swindon South, a Labour gain. For Robert Buckland, former Justice Secretary, a lonely walk to end a 14-year career as an MP. Angry, he blamed infighting and incompetence for leaving his party so diminished.
I'm fed up of personal agendas and jockeying for position. You know, the truth is now, with the Conservatives facing this electoral Armageddon, it's going to be like a group of bald men arguing over a comb.
The Liberal Democrats then ousted the current Justice Secretary, Alex Chalk, and the Education Secretary, Gillian Keegan. Labour defeated Penny Mordaunt, one of the favourites to be a future Tory leader. And another one too, the Defence Secretary, Grant Shapps.
We've tried the patience of traditional Conservative voters with a propensity to create an endless political soap opera out of internal rivalries and divisions, which have become increasingly indulgent and entrenched.
Jacob Rees-Mogg lost his seat to Labour. All the while, the Tory party chairman, Richard Holden, looked nervous. By just 20 votes, he scraped through. Doing the damage to the Conservatives in seat after seat was Reform. Lee Anderson won in Ashfield.
21,225.
And Nigel Farage finally, after so many failed attempts, elected MP for Clacton.
Believe me, folks, this is just the first step of something that is going to stun all of you. Thank you very much.
And already celebrating, the Liberal Democrats. They're on course for a record-equalling haul of seats. And a short time ago, a victory speech.
And now we can look forward again, walk into the morning, the sunlight of hope, pale at first, but getting stronger through the day.
Change, Sir Keir Starmer said, begins now. Damien Grammaticus, BBC News.
Other stories for you this morning. Former nurse Lucy Letby will be sentenced later this morning after being found guilty of the attempted murder of a premature baby girl 8 years ago. The 34-year-old, who was convicted following a retrial, is already serving 14 whole-life terms for the murder of 7 babies and the attempted murder of a further 6, the Countess of Chester Hospital, between 2015 and 2016. Hurricane Beryl, which has claimed the lives of at least 10 people across the Caribbean, has now weakened to a Category 2 storm. Hundreds of thousands of homes are still without power after the weather left a trail of destruction across many island nations. The UN has released more than £3 million in emergency funds to help those affected. And it was an emotional goodbye to Andy Murray at Wimbledon after what could be his final appearance on centre court. Following a defeat with his brother Jamie in the men's doubles, Andy and his family watched. Former BBC presenter Sue Barker paid tribute to his career. former world #1, was visibly tearful as he thanked his fans for their support. Let's have a look at the weather now. Carol's there for us this morning. Morning to you, Carol.
Good morning, Charlie. Good morning to you too. Today is basically a day of sunshine and showers, but we do have rain across southern counties of England and also Wales. It's been pushing in from the southwest through the course of the night, and it's steadily pushing southeastwards. Rain too crossing Scotland, tending to fragment now into a band of showers. So the heaviest rain clearing from the southeast, but in its wake there'll be a lot of cloud and some patchy light rain and drizzle before it peps up from the southwest later. Move north of that, a lot of dry weather, some sunny spells, at worst bright spells, and fewer showers than yesterday. Not as windy as yesterday either, with temperatures 13 to about 20, maybe 22 in Lincolnshire. Now, the front bringing this rain is going to push steadily northwards and eastwards through the night and into tomorrow, which means that tomorrow will start wet and also windy in eastern counties, improving in the west with some showers, but showery on Sunday. Charlie.
Carol, thank you very much. We will have updates throughout the morning from here. For the moment, though, I'll hand you back to London, and Clive and Laura are there now.
Welcome back. A little bit of a break there for a roundup of the rest of the news, but what a night it's been in the election for 2024. Labour on 390 seats as I speak. The Conservatives, they still haven't cracked three figures yet. Liberal Democrats on 60 and the SNP on 7. It's been quite a night.
It has. So if you're just beginning your day, if you managed some sleep or you were otherwise engaged, Labour has won the general election 2024, and they've won it very convincingly with a majority that is not quite, but nearly is as big as Tony Blair's was in 1997. We can show you the numbers in some detail on our catwalk graphic. You can see there Labour, as things stand, is on 408. Oh, forgive me, that's the graphic of the forecast. This is, we're predicting based on all the numbers we've had so far. Our forecast result is Labour on 408. The Tories on 136, but as Clive said, they've yet to break three figures in the real results. But the Lib Dems are projected to reach 66 seats. Another huge story of the night, the SNP is predicted to drop 40, ending up with just 8 seats. And another big headline underneath all of that, Nigel Farage and Richard Tice and Lee Anderson, candidates for the Reform Party, are becoming MPs. They've taken a seat also in Great Yarmouth, and the Reform Party, as things stand, are heading to Westminster with 4 MPs.
Yeah, Didcot and Wantage is a Liberal Democrat gain from the Conservatives. The swing there, 14.9%. So not looking good there either for the Conservative Party.
So there are 571 seats declared already, still 61 to go. But we have the lion's share of results that are showing Keir Starmer heading to Downing Street later today. He's already given a victory speech promising to govern for everyone, but he did allow himself briefly to crack several smiles and say it feels good.
And Rishi Sunak, having already conceded well before Labour actually got to 326, the finishing line, but he saw the writing on the wall and he actually conceded, or at least told the world, that he'd already been in touch with Sir Keir Starmer to congratulate him on his win, and he did this before his own count actually came in. Yeah.
An unusual move for him. Let's talk about what might happen next. So we know there's been a huge historic result overnight. We're joined by Helen McNamara, former Deputy Cabinet Secretary, the #2 most senior civil servant in Whitehall, and Tim Montgomery, very well-known and prominent observer and often critic recently of the Conservative Party. Fair. Let's start with you, Helen. For a party to move into government, what does it actually entail?
Well, it's a really big change, it's fair to say. So, I mean, the extraordinary thing about our system is that it happens so quickly. So, you know, yesterday, the opposition could criticise the government for anything they wanted to do. And then here they are today. By this afternoon, Keir Starmer will be Prime Minister, and suddenly you're accountable for everything the government does. So it's both a really big change in terms of kind of what the policies might be, and it's a really small and a very small kind of human change as well. So, you know, all these people who now have to find their new desks and work out how the building works and get to know all their new teams, and it will feel very different.
So the removal vans will arrive for several families, that kind of move in, move out, which happens in such a brutal way as people's lives change in front of our eyes. But as you understand it, I suppose, how ready would you say the Labour Party is? A few people have said to me in the last couple of weeks, look, because the polls have shown them ahead for so far, there is actually an unusually high degree of preparation for the transition.
Well, I'm sure there will be, and I know there's people who've been working really hard and thinking about this, but it's also difficult because there's a whole lot of superstition around politics as well, and everyone's always worried about looking like they've presumed the outcome of the election and are measuring the curtains. So as much as they will have done all kinds of preparations, being absolutely perfectly pitch point ready is quite hard because there's lots of conversations you can't really have or you don't want to have, and people you don't want to disappoint. So there'll be a lot still to sort out and work through over the coming days.
Tim Montgomery, the suggestion is that this is the worst ever result for the Conservatives in parliamentary history. How does a big and proud party used to government, how do they rebuild from this?
Well, it is exactly as you said. The electorate have punished the Conservative Party, and deservedly so. My party's descent from 2019 to now has been an extraordinary descent, and we deserve the kicking. Fortunately, it wasn't the biggest kicking that it could have been. I was worried a few hours ago it could have even been worse. If the projection is right and we end up with something like 136 seats, it isn't the extinction level event that some people in the party feared. And I think the survival of people like Jeremy Hunt, Ian Duncan Smith, extraordinary turn of events.
Your old boss.
Yeah, indeed. And I was really thrilled with that. And a real sense, you know, he had a 1,000 majority, yet he fought that seat. He didn't run away like so many other people. Having people like that who have experience will help the Conservative Party rebuild, because my worry was that it would be quite an inexperienced, sort of shallow, young Conservative parliamentary party. That's not going to be the case. One of the tensions, though, will be, compared to 1997, when the Conservative Party last lost, is the parliamentary party is perhaps more centrist, whereas the 1997 party was more right-wing. And there's going to potentially be a tension between the parliamentary party with that bias and the party in the country, the grassroots, which are much more right-wing, much more like reform, in a way. And that will be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah. All right, we're going to get more from you both in a few minutes, but we're going to go to Jeremy Vine. And to put that point in context, the idea that this is the worst ever parliamentary performance by the Conservatives in parliamentary history. Jeremy, you've got a bit more context on it.
Well, yeah, I was interested listening to Tim Montgomery there saying it's not an extinction level event, and that's true in the sense that we've not seen them reduced to 50 or 60 seats. But I'm going to give you some context here. To find leaders losing the number of seats that Rishi Sunak is losing, you have to go back. And we'll go back, first of all, to Disraeli in 1880, because Disraeli lost 113 seats, still not as many as Sunak is forecast to lose tonight. Another one for you, another comparison. There's Asquith, Liberal, 1924, 100 years ago, bad election, lost 114 seats. Still not as bad as the forecast for Mr. Sunak. So then we hit the 97 landslide and John Major. Let's see that. And Major going down 178 in what's, interestingly, quite a similar election to this one we're seeing overnight. But 178 is still fewer than Sunak is forecast to lose. What about this extraordinary result in 1945? Churchill, here, have a look at Churchill. So came through the Second World War and then was booted out by the voters, got back into power in the 50s, but in 45 lost 187 seats. So Clement Attlee's Labour came in like a storm there. Not as many as Sunak. Again, we're searching around here. Who lost as many as Sunak? Conservative, let's go to Balfour here, 1906. His loss was 211 seats. Still not as many as our forecast for Sunak. I've got one more for you. Labour, 1931, Arthur Henderson, lost 215. he was in a tricky spot because Ramsay MacDonald had peeled away, so he lost half his party. So I don't know if you really even count that. So we are left here, and it may not be an extinction-level event for the Conservatives. They've got enough MPs to form an opposition, but look at the forecast for Sunak when you compare them all. He is right down the end with a forecast loss of 236. And you can go back 145 years and not find a leader doing that badly in any general election.
Jeremy, thank you for the long view, to put it least, and yeah, some rather impressive hats.
I think it's a shame politicians don't wear hats anymore. We have seen some fantastic hats from returning officers. I think there was some various sort of town mayors, ceremonial robes, hats with feathers, all sorts of incredible things.
OK.
I can show you some pictures live of the Prime Minister for now, Rishi Sunak, who's plane there leaving Teesside Airport. Teesside Airport often talked of as being an achievement for the Conservatives in that area. They've got a powerful and popular mayor in that part of the world, Lord Ben Houchen. But Rishi Sunak beginning his last journey from the northeast of England down to London as Prime Minister, where in the early hours of this morning he will be returning to Downing Street, and they would expect him to emerge sometime mid-morning. He's promised he will have more to say about how things have gone so terribly wrong for his party before, of course, he will head off to Buckingham Palace to tender his resignation to the King. Before an hour or so later, we'd expect to see Keir Starmer make that journey in reverse and go and accept the King's invitation to form a government, just the 7th Labour government in history.
And it's likely, Tim Montgomery here in the studio, that he will step down as party leader. I mean, it's highly likely, isn't it? And that might well happen today.
I think it probably need to. There is a lot of anger in the Conservative Party about the campaign that's been fought. The choice of the election date is still upsetting many people. My hope, though, is that, and this may be a forlorn hope, is that the Conservative Party doesn't rush into a leadership election. It doesn't just have a leadership problem. It has, to lose the kind on the scale that it just has done, it has problems with its structure as an organisation, its campaigning ability, its policy thinking. It hasn't been the serious, competent, adult party that made it such a force in British politics in the post-war period. You know, already the debate's going to start. Now the polling booths are closed, people will talk frankly in a way. Once there's a new leader in place, the conversation is closed down. The Canadian Conservative Party, they wait a year to choose a leader. They take time to get the structures and the policy right before choosing a leader. I'm not expecting the Tory party to pause, but I hope it might.
I'm going to pause you there, Tim, with respect. We've just seen the Home Secretary there, James Cleverly, who has just, it looks like he's held, he's giving a little thanks to the crowd. He's held his seat in Essex, but he's about to speak. Let's listen in.
I'd like to say thank you to the people of Braintree, the new constituency of Braintree, who have returned me to Parliament as their representative, their champion, their spokesperson in Westminster. It is a privilege and an honour to serve, and I thank you for the opportunity to do so again. I would like to thank also all the people who made this election possible, the people who man the polling stations, who are involved in the count, the people who maintain security, and the members of the press who cover these proceedings. I would also, of course, like to thank my association, my campaign team, too many to mention by name, but I would particularly like to single out my campaign manager and my agent, who have worked so tirelessly through this campaign. I'd also like, of course, to thank the other candidates. This has been, I think, a well-mannered and good-natured campaign, as it should be, and I think that shows the Braintree constituency for what we know it to be, which is a wonderful place full of wonderful people, and the fact that the candidates who put themselves forward reflected that, I think, is very much to their credit. And, of course, I would like to thank my family, my long-suffering family, my 2 sons who have seen far less of me over the last 6 weeks. I was about to say than previously, but as a government minister, no one gets to see that much of me. And, of course, I want to pay a special level of gratitude to my beautiful and wonderful wife, who has not just had to put up with me being a Member of Parliament and a Minister, but as you know, has also fought and successfully won her own battle. And I could not have done it without you, so thank you very much. This has been a very difficult night for my party, and losing the position of government of this country is painful, but it is the nature of our democracy that it happens. And when it happens, it is incumbent upon I suppose all parties, but particularly the party leaving government, to listen carefully to what the voters are telling us. I am not going to rush to any quick judgments. I think the right thing to do is be thoughtful and take a short period of time to really assess what the voters are telling us. But it is clear that when you see the voter share of the traditional main parties of government, that many voters are disillusioned with all of us, and we should take that on board. I think it is also right that we have the humility to recognise that there is nothing honourable in presenting simple and thin solutions to challenging and complex problems. And the world is a difficult and dangerous place, and we have to respond to that. But this evening, I will finish as I started, by saying thank you to the wonderful, wonderful people of the Braintree constituency. It is an honour to serve. Thank you.
James Cleverly, technically still now the Home Secretary, but he will be moving out of that job tomorrow. But he has held his seat in Braintree in a very sombre speech. Put my teeth back in from him there at this time in the morning. So James Cleverly there, not making grand pronouncements on the state of the Conservative Party, but clearly acknowledging that this has been a terrible night for his party, the Conservatives, even though he, unlike so many of his colleagues, has managed to hold his seat.
Yeah, the Prime Minister, at least for the next few minutes. Rishi Sunak taking off there from Teesside Airport, heading back to London. And at some point in the next few hours, he will be heading to Buckingham Palace to offer his resignation. And Sir Keir Starmer will be called upon to take up the offer from the King to become the Prime Minister. So that a reflection of what happened overnight and into this morning.
Let's speak to a senior Conservative, another one of those who has lost their bid to become an MP in the House of Commons, Douglas Ross, who's still technically, Douglas, I believe you'll be technically still the leader of the Scottish Conservatives. You're joining us from Aberdeen. Thank you for joining us at the early hours of this morning. Can you believe how bad the UK picture is for your party?
No, it's extremely difficult. This has been a hugely challenging election. We have seen the exit poll, which has been borne out with the huge majority for the Labour Party, and we are unsure at the moment what that will deliver. There's a lot of talk about change, but we don't know what change will be. Here in Scotland, however, I think the story of the night is the demise of the SNP. The exit poll, as we heard from some of their senior politicians, was at the lower end of their expectations. Once again in this campaign, they put independence at the forefront of their campaign, and not the issues that really matter to people, such as our health service, education, and other key public services.
But it's not just the demise of the SNP in Scotland. I mean, you may only have dropped one seat so far, but your share of the vote has dropped by 12%. I mean, that is a significant fallback, isn't it?
Well, we knew that would be the case. The campaign we ran here in Scotland was focusing on our key seats, the key seats where we knew there was a straight choice between the Scottish Conservatives and the SNP. And in fact, our tally of seats could have been considerably more had it not been for the fact that many of our voters, and many voters across the country, selected Reform despite the risk that it would allow SNP MPs to be elected. And that's certainly what happened in my own seat of Aberdeenshire North and Moray East. The Reform candidate got over 5,000 votes, 15% of the vote almost, and that has allowed an SNP MP to be elected here. So that's another thing we will have to reflect on both here in Scotland and across the UK.
What ought you to have done then as a party to hold off that threat from reform, which you blame for you losing your own berth?
Well, I'm not blaming that solely. Look, I will carry the burden of my own issues here locally and nationally as party leader. I'm not trying to shy away from that in any way. I don't think that would be the right approach to take. But we have seen that voters have been disenfranchised recently from a lot of the parties. I think they have looked for an alternative, and in this election we know a lot of Conservative voters have gone to reform. That will not see a lot of Reform MPs elected. It has seen, however, a significant number of Conservative MPs fail to be elected, and that was the risk that we were highlighting, particularly here in Scotland, because in many of the key seats it was a straight choice between Scottish Conservatives or the SNP, and seats where the SNP have been able to hold on is because that reform vote, such as here in Aberdeenshire North and Moray East, I think it's the highest anywhere in Scotland, an area that voted for Brexit, so it was always going to be a key risk here, has allowed the SNP to win through the back door.
And Douglas Strauss, briefly, if you could, what should happen next? So Tim Montgomery, prominent Conservative commentator with us in the studio, has said the party should have a long leadership contest. They shouldn't rush into anything. Is that what you would like to see, or actually do you want to just get on with it?
No, I think Tim's right. I think we shouldn't rush into anything. The time in opposition has to be used wisely. There's going to be a significant job for those elected to the House of Commons as Conservative MPs to scrutinise and hold to account this Labour government with a massive majority, but with very little detail into the plans that they consider are right for the future of the country. But we also have to make sure that we take time as a party to select the right approach to move on from this very difficult night and the defeats that we've seen to rebuild and get back into power as quickly as possible.
Douglas Strauss, thank you so much for giving us time after a very long night and your own loss of a seat. Thanks very much indeed for joining us.
We're going to go to Waveney Valley, and Adrian Ramsey, co-leader of the Greens, smiling very broadly there. It's been a good night.
It has indeed, and we have won all 4 of our target seats, including here in Waveney Valley, the first Green MP in East Anglia, as well as winning all of our other target seats across the country. And I think people have responded very positively to us putting forward a hopeful vision for a future where people have active local MPs representing them, but also where we have Greens in Parliament to push the new government to be bolder, whether that's on restoring our public services or on defending the environment.
You overturned a Conservative majority of 22,000. Incredible.
Well, it is incredible, and I'm truly humbled by the level of support for people. I'm from East Anglia. It's a constituency that spans the Norfolk-Suffolk border, an area that I love, and where people have been used to having Green councillors representing them over a long period of time. They've seen that Greens do a diligent job as local representatives and do a credible job in trying to make a difference for their local communities, whether it's on public services or whether it's on the environment. And people at this election have clearly wanted a change, and here in Waveney Valley they voted for a positive change, for Greens who will work hard to represent them. I'll be an active, visible local MP, and with the other 3 Greens who've been elected tonight, a record number of Greens in Parliament, we'll be pushing the new government to be bolder, because Keir Starmer's been somewhat timid in this election in doing his U-turns both on climate and on funding for public services. We'll be pushing for the real action that's needed on the issues that are affecting people.
Yeah, you're going to be pushing from a base of 4 seats. Keir Starmer, he's on 397 at the moment, doesn't need you. Doesn't need you.
Well, it's about having a diverse range of voices in the political debate. And if you look at the fact that Labour has got this huge majority, but actually on not a particularly high percentage of the vote compared to previous Labour votes in previous general elections, I think it shows that people haven't been massively inspired by Labour, and so many people have looked elsewhere. And with the Greens, they've looked for a positive alternative. We've seen during the course of this election how we've influenced the debate. We've forced climate up the agenda. We've shown that there is a way in which we could put more funding into the NHS and social care if we're willing to take the bold choices, ask the very richest in society to pay a little bit more in tax to do so. So we will be pushing for Labour to be bolder on these issues, and we'll be champions of our own local communities in those 4 constituencies where we've got Greens elected, including here in Waveney Valley, where I know the issues that people really want to be addressed.
What you would really like is a change in the first past the post system here. That is even further away than it was at the beginning of the night, given the scale of Labour's victory.
Well, we've just had our most successful set of election results ever in the Green Party. We've run the most ambitious election campaign we ever have, standing candidates right across the country with what I believe will be a record vote share and going from 1 MP to 4. And we've won in places, including here in Waveney Valley and in North Herefordshire. 2 seats we've won from the Conservatives in places where people really didn't expect us to do it. So we're very pleased with this result. We've done that under the voting system we have. And yes, I would like to see a change to a fairer system, but that's not because about which party that will support. That's because it will be better for the voter in ensuring every vote counts equally. And I think those questions will be asked on that, given that Labour will have such a huge majority, but with not much more than 40% of the vote, I believe.
OK, Adrian Ramsey, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
This is Election 2024. Time now for a roundup of the latest news where you are.
Good morning and welcome to BBC London's election special. I'm Laxmi Gopal. Labour have made significant gains across London in the general election. The Liberal Democrats have increased their number of MPs in South West London, while the Conservatives have hung on to 9 seats. As it stands, with a couple of seats to declare, Labour have 56, the Conservatives have 9 and the Lib Dems have 6. Jeremy Corbyn also won as an independent in Islington North. Our political correspondent Carl Mercer has more.
A winning welcome for a winning leader. Keir Starmer seeing the country and the capital go a wider spread of red. They won in former Conservative heartlands, like here in Beckenham.
Just really pleased, really proud of the campaign that we've run. Absolutely delighted at this historic moment. This is the first time Labour have ever won a London constituency.
Victories too in neighbouring Bexley-Heath, in Westminster, in Finchley and Golders Green, in Chipping Barnet and in Kensington. There was defeat, though, to their former leader, Jeremy Corbyn, who easily won Islington North, the seat he's represented for more than 40 years.
We have shown what kinder, gentler, more sensible, more inclusive politics can bring about. I couldn't be more proud of my constituency than I am tonight. I'm proud of our team that brought this result. Thank you very much, Islington North, for the result that we've achieved tonight. Thank you.
The Lib Dems were celebrating a good night in the capital, building once again in their strongholds in the south-west and picking up Wimbledon for the first time.
What I remember is losing in 2019. That's the thing I remember, and that spurred us on for 5 years.
Well, I'm from a very working class background. Dad's a scaffolder, mum's a cleaner. Grew up in a council house. They're still council tenants to this day, and I don't see enough of that in politics. I think the public don't see enough of that in politics as well, and I feel like I want to go in there and be a voice for families like mine.
The Conservatives did hold on to some seats they thought they might lose, here in Harrow East and in Chingford, where their former leader Ian Duncan-Smith won.
17,281.
The Labour vote split after they replaced their candidate just weeks before the election.
I know that we're going to be so disappointed to have Ian Duncan-Smith all over again and be disappointed knowing that we could have won if it hadn't been for the lies, if it hadn't been for what Labour Party did to me.
Why do you think Conservatives aren't connecting with Londoners?
Well, I think the trouble is we've forgotten about working for people in the communities. I've worked relentlessly for people here. My record of success, from getting a new hospital built right the way through to getting rid of antisocial behaviour, fighting about the closure of the Broadmead Road Bridge, these are everyday issues for people here, and it's important therefore that people, MPs, focus on that, and too many of them have thought Parliament was everything and not their communities.
So the new Prime Minister is a London MP and a Labour one. During May's mayoral campaign, Sadiq Khan said that would mean a better deal for the capital. His opponent back then says now we'll see if that's true.
Sadiq Khan has spent his entire time blaming the Conservative government that he can't do this, he can't do that. Well, he won't have anybody to blame, although I suspect he'll still try.
Well, I think Keir's right to talk about a long-term plan. I think he needs 2 terms.
I'll be working with him straight away. I've already been in touch with him today. I'll make sure that, with a Labour government, me as the mayor is working as closely with them as possible. Look, for the last 8 years, we've had a Tory government putting obstacles in our way rather than working with us for the benefit of our city and our country, working against us. That will not happen with a Labour government.
Now we'll be able to find out. Labour is as strong in London as it has ever been and has a national government with a huge majority. Carl Mercer, BBC London.
Let's go straight to our political editor, Tim Donovan, who's in the seat of Chelsea and Fulham, where one of the latest results, one of the final results has just come through. Tim, update us.
Yeah, and you've come just at the right time because seconds ago, the winner here is Labour's Ben Coleman, who is deputy leader of Hammersmith Council. But the major achievement of his is that he has defeated the Minister for London, Greg Hands. And I haven't been able to, couldn't hear the exact number, but I think it's under 200 votes. There's been a recount here. In fact, there have been two recounts here. Greg Hands had an 11,000 majority. It's another central London seat alongside cities of Westminster. Greg Hands had fought what people regarded as a really good campaign. He had a visibility here, and he is a senior Conservative official, but he has lost his seat after 19 years.
Tim, thank you for the very latest there. Our political editor, Tim Donovan. Well, let's look at results elsewhere in our region. In Surrey, the Conservatives have held on to Godalming and Ash, the seat of Chancellor Jeremy Hunt. They've also held East Surrey, while the Liberal Democrats made a gain in Surrey Heath. In Hertfordshire, Grant Shapps lost his seat to Labour. They also took the seat of Hemel Hempstead. Harpenden and Berkhamsted has gone from Conservative to Lib Dem, while the Tories held on to Hertsmere. In Essex, Labour took the Thurrock seat from the Conservatives. They also won both constituencies in Southend and one in Harlow. The Conservatives held on to Basildon and Brentford. In Chelmsford, the Lib Dems were celebrating success there. And BBC London will keep you up to date with the latest throughout the day. Eddie Nestor is live on BBC Radio London through to 10 o'clock this morning. There he is there. And to find the specific results where you live, you can head to the BBC News website. That's it for now. Now back to more election coverage. Goodbye.
Warm welcome back to our coverage of the general election 2024. We're just after 6:30 in the morning on a day when Keir Starmer will become the next Prime Minister of the UK after winning a very substantial majority indeed. Boris Johnson's 29 seats have fallen like dominoes and been taken by Keir Starmer's Labour Party.
OK, you've just mentioned two former Prime Ministers and one man who's about to leave. We're now going to talk about Liz Truss because we're going to go to the countdown in southwest Norfolk. Ros Atkins is there. Ros, when we spoke to you a few minutes ago, you said this was on a knife edge. What's it looking like now?
Well, Clive, all evening in this leisure centre in Kings Lynn, there's been a hubbub of activity as two counts go on for northwest Norfolk and southwest Norfolk. Northwest Norfolk has gone to the Conservatives. Southwest Norfolk is Liz Truss's constituency, and a quiet has fallen over this hall because, as you can see here, all of the other candidates have gathered. They are ready to go on stage. We're expecting the results to be called in the next 10 minutes. One candidate, though, isn't here at the moment. That is Liz Truss, and the BBC has received a strong indication that she has lost her seat. We don't know the result. This is not confirmed, but we have received a strong indication that Liz Truss has lost. For the last few hours, the Labour Party has been telling us they believe they're in a strong position. We also know from numerous sources that Reform's vote has exceeded some expectations. So we do not know the result of this, but the BBC has received a strong indication that Liz Truss has lost. And with just a few minutes to go before this result is announced, we wait to see if Liz Truss will be here, along with the other candidates, to hear that result announced.
Ros, thank you for that. 10 cabinet ministers have lost their seats and now potentially one former Prime Minister, Tim Montgomery.
Well,
what do you say?
The first past the post system has been cruel to my party tonight because we probably have lost more seats than we would if the percentage of the vote was true. But It's amazing how, in Germany, the Social Democrats survive almost every election. It's very hard with proportional representation to really get rid of a party if you really want them out of power. But if you really want people out of power in the first past the post system, you can do it. And Liz Truss really showed no repentance for her time as Prime Minister. She damaged the country, she damaged the party, and she's being punished, it seems, tonight. And someone who has seen so many good Conservative people lose seats tonight, partly because of the conduct of her government, that brief period when she was in power, I'm afraid I'm not going to shed any tears for her. The Conservative Party has to rebuild with fresh faces, and people like Liz Truss hanging around wasn't going to help the Conservative Party. So the voters of that constituency may well have done the Conservative Party quite a big favour by ousting someone who was a real anchor on Tory progress.
So it wasn't just her conduct in office. It was her conduct when she left office as well, you're saying? I mean, hanging out with the likes of Steve Bannon and so on?
Yeah, definitely that, Clive, but just the failure to show any sort of acknowledgement that she made mistakes. I think the British people are reasonable people. She definitely needs to be judged harshly for her time in office, but they'll forgive people, they'll welcome them back into public life, at least if they show some contrition. She never showed any.
Chris, it would be extraordinary if this result comes to pass. And we don't know yet for sure, but the fact that Liz Truss is nowhere to be seen, Ros is being told on the ground that Labour believe they might have done it. It is incredible for a former Prime Minister to be booted out of their constituency in this manner. A majority of, I think, 24,000 it was potentially being overturned.
Hugely safe Conservative seat in conventional times. She faced a lot of candidates running against her there, including a independent, part of a family who had been none too pleased when she became the Conservative candidate way back when. They were known as the Turnip Taliban in Norfolk when she was, as they saw it, imposed upon them back in 2010, I think it was. But yes, if this were to come to pass, for a recent Prime Minister to be toppled in a traditionally incredibly safe seat for their party would really be quite something. And it looks like that moment's coming.
Indeed, there's no sign of Liz Truss there. Now, all the other candidates are lined up there on the stage in King's Lynn, waiting for the declaration in her seat of South West Norfolk. It looks like there's rather an air of hesitation. Perhaps they're looking for her. Perhaps she's left. We just don't know at this stage, but it may be many hours after the direction of travel of this election result became clear that we are about to see one of the biggest headlines of the night, a former Prime Minister losing her seat, the former Prime Minister who had to leave office after an extraordinarily short time there, just over 40 days.
And if you have been at the count throughout the day, while the votes are being counted, do you have to be on the stage? Can they now make this declaration without her being there?
Yes, candidates technically could leave. Yes, sometimes they go off in a huff. It does happen from time to time.
George Galloway was not on the stage in Rochdale earlier in the evening. I say evening at 6:45 in the morning, but you know what I mean.
So even though she's not there, we could be getting this result in the next few seconds.
It looks like they are waiting. It looks like the landscape is being surveyed, doesn't it?
They're waiting for something. But as we just chat, I mean, Tim Montgomery, you were just saying to us that you won't shed a tear for Liz Truss. Might some people in your party rather see this as a metaphor, actually, for what has happened? Not in the first part of your time in charge, perhaps since 2010, that period of stability when you ruled with the Liberal Democrats, perhaps the period since the referendum, which publicly split your party in two. And since then, so much turmoil, so many events where you've played it out in public. And if Liz Truss loses her seat, is this the finale to that terrible period?
Well, I hope so, in a way. Because
You hope she loses?
I do hope she loses, because I think there is a need to cleanse the Conservative Party and to cleanse the Conservative Party of some of these very malign influences. Can I just say, though, you're right, Laura, completely to emphasise how badly the Conservative Party has descended since 2019. But I think the global context, we could be very parochial sometimes, but the global context is important. Look what's happening in France at the moment. Look at what's happened in Germany with the AfD rising. I only have to mention Biden-Trump to make the point. For all over the Western world, we're seeing mainstream political parties that used to rule their countries in two-party systems being broken and torn apart. When we understand that there's something actually more fundamentally wrong with Western democracy, rather than just the Conservative Party, rather than just the Republican Party, rather than just Macron's party, we'll perhaps begin to repair our democratic systems. Because I think in 10 to 15 years' time, if we don't really look at that, we may look back at this period and say, all the warnings and signings were there, actually, of democracy in trouble, and we didn't heed them.
But hang on, Tim, you've just sat there and called a Conservative former Prime Minister, who was a minister during comparatively very stable times under David Cameron. She was on the Remain side in the referendum. You've sat there and said she's a malign influence.
I completely stand by that, Laura. I think she made terrible mistakes in time in government. She blamed everyone else other than herself. She poisoned the Conservative Party's reputation, never then really backed or helped her successor.
Tim, they're slow hand clapping, apparently. They're in King's Lynn. If we can bring it up, there we go. And that must be for the candidate who is not on the stage, and that would be the former Prime Minister, Liz Truss. If she has lost her seat, having been Prime Minister, Defence Secretary, remember, as well, senior positions in government. This is an ignominious end, isn't it?
Well, look, I hope she's not ill in any way. Let's not rule that possible.
Absolutely.
I don't know why she's not on the stage. But if she's well and just is avoiding a kind of Portillo moment of the kind that we saw in '97, if she's not willing to face the electorate after losing, other than a health reason, it's a real form of cowardice and will only confirm the harsh words, and I admit they are harsh, but I think they're justified words that I've just said about
I mean, Rishi Sunak and so many Conservative candidates, they spent the last 6 weeks running away from the record of Liz Truss because it was a record that was detrimental to any kind of message, positive message, it seemed, to put out there to voters.
Yeah. And I've been very critical of Rishi Sunak, but one thing he never really did, he didn't lay into his predecessors. He could have done much more blaming of his predecessors for his inheritance. He didn't do that, actually, to his credit, I think.
Just while we're waiting to find out exactly what is going on here, you can see some of the candidates getting a bit impatient, actually. Not just the people doing a slow hand clap on the floor, but some of them getting really quite cross. I just want to ask you, Tim, do you think if Rishi Sunak had behaved differently, that he could have prevented this result being so bad? And we should tell our audience, you have been a staunch critic of Rishi Sunak for some time.
She's here.
There we go.
There she is on the stage. Let's listen in.
I, David Flux, being the returning officer for the election of a Member of Parliament to South West Norfolk, do hereby give notice that the number of votes for each candidate is as follows. Bagg, James, Independent, 6,282. Conway, Gary Daniel Dominic, Heritage Party, Freedom Family Nation, 160. Duvalapalli, Pallavi, Green Party, 1,838. Douglas, Lorraine, Communist Party of Britain, 77. Jeremy, Terry, Labour Party, 11,847. Mackenzie, Tobias, Reform UK, 9,958. Of East Anglia, Earl Elvis, Official Monster Raving Loony Party, 338. Ratcliffe, Josie, Liberal Democrats, 2,618. Truss, Liz, the Conservative Party candidate, 11,217. The number of ballot papers rejected was 139, and I do hereby declare that Jeremy Terry is duly elected.
It was a close-run thing in the end, but remember, she was defending a majority of 26,000, over 26,000, and it has been completely squashed. The former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom has lost her seat, and this caps an appalling night for the Conservatives. Let's just hear the victory speech here.
Liz Truss has lost with a majority for Labour of 630 votes, so hardly anything in it, but no avoiding a genuine humiliation for the former Prime Minister, Liz Truss, who has lost her seat in South West Norfolk. As Clive was saying, it's an absolutely massive majority that she had previously has been absolutely overturned. Let's talk straight away to James Cleverly. As things stand, the Home Secretary, he's just won his seat. But James, a brutal night for your party, capped off by this humiliation for your former colleague, Liz Truss.
Well, look, we've got to recognise this is an incredibly difficult night for us. Sorry, I'm hearing myself. Sorry about that, Laura. I'm just hearing myself in my ear.
Okay.
It's an incredibly difficult night for the Conservative Party. We have lost a number of, I think, good parliamentarians, excellent parliamentarians. We're going to have to reflect on that. We're going to have to ask ourselves some proper searching questions, not jump to answers, but actually ask ourselves what we need to learn from this result and what we do to get ourselves back into government and start serving the British people again as quickly as possible.
Was Liz Truss a good parliamentarian? Now she's lost her seat.
Well, I think when you've had... so the short answer is I think she was a great parliamentarian. However, of course, her most recent time has been marked by her short time as Prime Minister. She was very high profile, and of course that sometimes has an effect, an impact on electoral results like this. I mean, Liz was a friend as well as a colleague. She was incredibly generous of spirit when Susie was diagnosed with breast cancer. She was my boss as Foreign Secretary. I will always have a huge degree of affection for Liz, and it is really sad to hear the result that I heard just before I came on air.
In terms, though, of her humiliation, she is by far from being alone. There are dozens of ministers, many well-known people who have lost their seats tonight. In a matter of moments, we might hear directly from her at the lectern on the stage, and we'll go straight to that. In fact, she's there. Oh, she hasn't quite started. We'll bring you that as soon as we possibly can. So I've put you on notice, James Cleverly, that we may have to cut into you, but actually I think she's walking off the stage. Let's see if we can show our viewers the pictures. Liz Truss is leaving her count there. She will not speak on the stage. Our cameras perhaps can move in a bit more closely to see her. She's in the middle of that crowd there, having lost by only 630 votes. She's standing there chatting to her husband. But what an incredible moment of history as a former Prime Minister is booted out of office. Only 630 votes in it. But James Cleverly, she's far from alone. Dozens of ministers have lost their seats. Some people in the studio tonight have said, oh, well, it's the swing of the pendulum. This was always bound to happen. We've been in charge for such a long time. But it didn't have to be this bad, did it?
Well, look, democracy, as I've said, is both a beautiful but also a brutal thing. And we all recognise that when you go into elected office, there is a risk that you are, you lose. It's one of those things that happens. You don't want it to happen, but you recognise that it does happen, and it is as important a part of democracy as winning is. But it's horrible when good friends and colleagues lose their positions as members of Parliament. But all we can do is, as I said before, think carefully about why this has happened, not jump to conclusions or rush to answers, but take a short period of time to think about what has happened and why and how we respond to that. And that is what the Conservative Party does. This is a very, very bad result for us tonight. But as the Labour Party has proven, you can go from a very bad result to being in government in a relatively short period of time. That should be our natural aspiration, and that's what we will work towards.
But it is by far your worst ever performance in terms of the share of the vote. I mean, it's unimaginable previously to think that the Conservatives would be down so low. This is not a standard election defeat. Why do you think it happened? You must have thought about this. It's been clear which way the wind was blowing for some time.
Well, we've seen that, sadly, as we predicted, a large number of people who previously voted Conservative voted Reform, and that meant that the Labour Party, in many, many seats, were able to win. And that's not about blaming anybody. It's a statement of fact. We need to think, why did those people move away from the Conservative Party? What do we need to do to win back their trust and their support? How do we make sure that we put ourselves into a position where we can once again be a party of government, a broad-based party of government that reflects the needs and the desires and the wishes of the British people? I'm not going to pretend I have all the answers to those questions here this evening, but as a party, we're going to have to think hard about that.
James Clive Myrie here. I mean, you've talked about a period of reflection that you feel is needed, not too long, although there are some suggesting that it should be like the Canadians and it should be at least a year to have a proper analysis of what went wrong. But as you saw your friend there, Liz Truss, lose her own seat, was she partly to blame for that period, less than 50 days in office? Is she part of the issue here and that radical form of economics that she tried to put forward?
So I just said I'm not going to jump at answers here, and I'm certainly not going to kind of make comments about someone who I regard, as I say, not just as a colleague, but as a genuine friend. So look, all I can say is what I've said already, which is rather boring television for you, but it just happens to be what I feel, which is that we need to think about this. We need to not rush to conclusions. We need to look at the full set of outcomes through the rest of today. We've clearly been told that we know that the Labour Party are going to have a very large majority. But I think, and I may be proven wrong when I have a look at the numbers, but I think that large majority is off the back of a very, very modest increase in share of the vote. And indeed, the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, the two traditional parties of government in the UK, we have had, a much smaller combined share of the vote than in the past. And we need to ask ourselves why. The Conservative Party will certainly do that. I think it would probably be smart for the Labour Party to do likewise, and we'll do that thinking before we take action.
OK, James Cleverly, Home Secretary for now. Thank you very much indeed for joining us early in the morning. So Truss out, Jeremy Corbyn in, Nigel Farage in. It's a night of big headlines.
It is, and we're all wondering what you're thinking about all this. You hear James Cleverly there, Liz Truss losing
I'm watching
her
those
seat.
pictures from Norfolk. In many ways, Liz Truss's story personifying the Conservative story of recent years, really, of when the highs are high and then the lows are low. So you have someone who was Prime Minister a matter of not long ago, not able to hold a seat that was one of the Conservatives' safest. And one little stat a colleague has just shared with me. Liz Truss has lost her seat. Theresa May's seat has gone to the Liberal Democrats. David Cameron's old seat has gone to the Liberal Democrats. And one of Boris Johnson's old seat has gone to Labour. So Rishi Sunak is the only Prime Minister of the last 14 years whose seat is still Conservative.
There, yeah.
How extraordinary.
It is extraordinary, but you get the sense tonight, as the numbers have come in, there is no safe territory for the Conservatives in this election.
Quite. Exactly that. Exactly that.
I mean, that was a majority of 26,000.
Yes, exactly. And therefore, clearly nothing was safe. And if we take half a step back to the kind of electoral cycle going back 5, 6, 7 years, and that whole notion of safe seats for so many parties has taken something of a battering. Really has.
I suppose 2019 was such a product of volatility. This is also a product of volatility. Voters can change their mind.
There's a lot of volatility about.
Very, very quickly.
Although, I would have thought a lot of people thought that volatility from 2019 was not necessarily a thing of the past, but that things had calmed down a little bit since then.
Well, there aren't any rules. I think all the rules got broken a long time ago. think our rules are that we're probably heading to the news, are we?
We are, yes, indeed. I think Charlie State's got an update on the situation in news away from the election.
Clive, thank you very much. Good morning. It's Friday, the 5th of July. The Labour Party has won a landslide victory in the general election, with the Conservatives on course for the worst result in their history. Rishi Sunak conceded defeat, congratulating the next Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer. In the past few minutes, the former Prime Minister Liz Truss has become the latest Conservative to lose their seat as Labour overturned a huge majority. The Liberal Democrats and Reform Party have made gains, but there have been significant losses for the SNP. Here's our political correspondent, Demi Grammaticus.
5 a.m. and enter the winner, a new Prime Minister-elect. In just 4 years, he's taken Labour from historic low to landslide.
And now we can look forward again, walk into the morning, the sunlight of hope, pale at first, but getting stronger through the day, shining once again on a country with the opportunity after 14 years to get its future back.
Earlier re-elected, but knowing he'd led his party to its worst ever election result, Rishi Sunak conceded.
The Labour Party has won this general election, and I have called Sir Keir Starmer to congratulate him on his victory. Today, power will change hands in a peaceful and orderly manner, with goodwill on all sides.
Elected.
The first senior Tory to go was just after midnight. Swindon South, a Labour gain. For Robert Buckland, former Justice Secretary, a lonely walk to end a 14-year career as an MP. Angry, he blamed infighting and incompetence for leaving his party so diminished.
I'm fed up of personal agendas and jockeying for position. You know, the truth is now, with the Conservatives facing this electoral Armageddon, it's going to be like a group of bald men arguing over a comb.
The Liberal Democrats then ousted the current Justice Secretary, Alex Chalk, and the Education Secretary, Gillian Keegan. Labour defeated Penny Mordaunt, one of the favourites to be a future Tory leader. And another one too, the Defence Secretary, Grant Shapps.
We've tried the patience of traditional Conservative voters with a propensity to create an endless political soap opera out of internal rivalries and divisions, which have become increasingly indulgent and entrenched.
Jacob Rees-Mogg lost his seat to Labour. All the while, the Tory party chairman, Richard Holden, looked nervous. By just 20 votes, he scraped through. Doing the damage to the Conservatives in seat after seat was Reform. Lee Anderson won in Ashfield.
21,235.
And Nigel Farage finally, after so many failed attempts, elected MP for Clacton.
Believe me, folks, this is just the first step of something that is going to stun all of you. Thank you very much.
And already celebrating, the Liberal Democrats. They're on course for a record-equalling haul of seats. In Scotland, Labour has scooped up seats from the SNP. They had 45, now reduced to single digits. So this is Keir Starmer's moment to savour. A time, he said, for the nation to start a new chapter. Jamie Grammaticus, BBC News.
A summary of other news for you this morning as well. The former nurse Lucy Letby will be sentenced later this morning after being found guilty of the attempted murder of a premature baby girl 8 years ago. The 34-year-old, who was convicted following a retrial, is already serving 14 whole-life terms for the murder of 7 babies, the attempted murder of a further 6 at the Countess of Chester Hospital between 2015 and 2016. Hurricane Beryl, which has claimed the lives of at least 10 people across the Caribbean, has now weakened to a Category 2 storm. Hundreds of thousands of homes are still without power after the weather left a trail of destruction across many island nations. The UN has released more than £3 million in emergency funds to help those affected. The online retail company Amazon turns 30 today. The Seattle-based firm, which is valued at $2 trillion, began life as an internet bookseller. That was in 1994. And an emotional goodbye to Andy Murray at Wimbledon after what could be his final appearance on court. Following a defeat with his brother Jamie in the men's doubles, Andy became emotional while chatting to BBC presenter Sue Barker. Let's have a look at the weather. Carol's there for us now.
Good morning, everyone. Today essentially is a day of sunshine and showers for most of us, but if you're in the south of England, South Wales, we are looking at more cloud and also some rain. That is the picture at the moment. The rain has steadily been coming in from the southwest. It's drifting towards the southeast. A weather front crossing Scotland bringing rain, now fragmenting into a band of showers. So some of this rain in the south will be heavy. As it clears away into the near continent, you'll find it's left behind it a legacy of cloud and also some patchy light rain and drizzle before it rejuvenates from the southwest later. Move north of that, we're into sunshine and some showers and not as windy as yesterday. Temperatures 13 to about 20, possibly 22 around Lincolnshire. Now through this evening and overnight and into tomorrow, this weather front bearing the rain pushes northeastwards. It's going to be wet and windy in the east tonight and also first thing tomorrow. In the west, some showers and widespread showers on Sunday. Charlie.
Carol, thank you very much. Clive, Laura, back to you.
Welcome back to our coverage of the general election 2024. The UK will have a new Prime Minister. Sir Keir Starmer will take office later on today. Rishi Sunak has been sent packing by the electorate, the Conservatives crashing to their worst ever parliamentary defeat in modern times.
And Rishi Sunak's plane has just landed, took off from Teesside in the last hour or so, and it's now landed at RAF Northolt. And at some point in the chucking rain there, that's actually how this whole thing began. Rain outside number 10 when he announced that he was going to hold the election at a point this year when he didn't have to. And I'm sure there are going to be lots of criticism of that decision, clearly, because it just has not worked out. He's landed there, and at some point today he will be heading to Buckingham Palace to tender his resignation. And he will no longer be Prime Minister. That will be Keir Starmer. He's already made it clear at his count in Richmond in Yorkshire that he intends to stay on as an MP. How much longer he'll stay on as leader of the Conservative Party is the big question. The suggestion being that at some point, probably today, he will actually step down. But we'll see what happens there. And these are live pictures now of his plane taxiing in, and he'll be at some point disembarking and heading back to number 10, probably to start packing.
And in terms of Rishi Sunak's time in office, 20 months, remember he came into office, Chris, didn't he, believing that he, as a brand, because Rishi Sunak was very much a brand, was more popular than the Conservatives, and hoping to drag the party up to where he was in terms of popularity. However, actually, the opposite has happened, and he is now on his way out.
Yes, so he knew, I think, on assuming office as Prime Minister, that he was walking into significant political headwinds, not least because to win a fifth term in a row for the Conservative Party would have broken any modern precedent. But yeah, he did define himself, certainly at the outset, against his most recent predecessors, and argued that, yeah, he would be different in tone and style and outlook, both to Liz Truss and to Boris Johnson. But when there wasn't any significant improvement in the Conservatives' polling position, he tried various other strategies to try and arrest that, which often were in contradiction with each other, frankly.
So reboot, restart, refresh, none of it worked, and they went into reverse.
A classic example being at the party conference last October, where you saw Rishi Sunak in his conference speech pretty much define himself against the record of the previous Conservative Prime Ministers and indeed previous Labour ones. A matter of weeks later, he appointed Lord Cameron, one of his predecessors, into his cabinet. I think, Laura, what's interesting about Rishi Sunak and his legacy, if you like, is that I suspect the history books, shorn as they are of the daily noise of news, will acknowledge that he stabilised politically and economically the UK after a period of extreme turbulence in both of those categories. But doing that was never likely to be enough to win a general election, given the political inheritance that he took on.
OK, I don't think very many Conservatives will be feeling very kind to him this morning.
No.
I'm not sure. Also, the reception in Downing Street will be very kind to him, where, believe it or not, as Clive was saying, the weather in Downing Street right now for Leela Nathu, poor her, who's sensibly remembered umbrella, unlike the Prime Minister, is just as bad a horrible of a reception as the electorate has just given the Conservatives. Leela, I was going to say what's the mood like in Downing Street, but I think we can see on the screen what the atmosphere must be like in Downing Street. But what do you expect to see there in the next little while?
Sorry, Laura, just lost you in my ear just briefly then. But yeah, it's ending the election here in Downing Street very much as it began, in the pouring rain. Rishi Sunak, as you said, is on his way back here. He's now landed back at RAF Northolt. You saw the pictures of his plane landing there. He will make his way back to Downing Street. We don't know if he's going to walk up the street behind me or go in the back entrance. But of course, there is this very kind of human story here as well in Downing Street, of a family having to pack up their lives very quickly and head to a new home. So we're expecting Rishi Sunak to arrive here in the next hour or so. We've already seen Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, about an hour ago, pitch up here into number 11. He, of course, will also be vacating his workplace and his home here in Downing Street, perhaps unexpectedly one of the cabinet survivors who we were all very surprised to see pull up here. But he, of course, will be making way for the new occupant of number 11. So Rishi Sunak, we expect to hear from him. We don't know whether he is planning a stopover at the Conservative Party headquarters for the moment. That perhaps might be a farewell message to his staff, a thank you message there first before he gets here. And then we do expect to hear a few more words from Rishi Sunak. He hinted at that, didn't he, in his speech at his own account, that he would be saying more about the result later on. So we're expecting another speech, a departure speech from Rishi Sunak as he heads off to the palace.
OK, Leela Nathu, thank you very much indeed. From a very soggy Downing Street, I'll see you there a bit later on. And you wonder what it would be like for Rishi Sunak if he does go to Tory headquarters. In particular, nerves have been jangled because he's given his Chief of Staff a peerage and sending him to the House of Lords, even though lots of people are furious at how the campaign was run.
Yeah. Lots of analysis and recriminations, one suspects, and possibly so as well in Birmingham Yardley. Let's go and talk to Jess Phillips, who has held on to her seat there, but with a drastically reduced majority, Jess Phillips, of a few hundred, less than 700. Just sum up how difficult it's been for you there, despite the victory.
I mean, here at the count, you mean? I mean, it's been pretty, and throughout the campaign, it's been pretty gruesome. It's been one of the worst election campaigns I've ever stood in, although the Brexit one wasn't all that cracking. And I've suffered attacks then as well. But yeah, it's been pretty gruelling here. And I'm afraid to say some of my opponents did not reflect at all the manner in which my constituents behaved, which was with decorum and class. So, yeah, it's not been much fun. But you know what? I won, and so did the Labour Party, so I'm quite chuffed.
Sure. A win is a win. You did resign from the front bench over Gaza. Was that part of the issue here?
Mm-hmm. What was Gaza? My resignation wasn't part of the issue, no. But Gaza was part of the issue. It was absolutely.
That's what I meant.
There's an issue in my constituency. So Gaza was definitely part of the issue, but also the reform vote was massively increased as well. So it's a sort of pincer movement, which shows, I suppose, the diversity of my constituency, which is one of the reasons I really like it. Gaza was a massive issue, no doubt about it.
I mean, you have a reduced majority now, and it is reflective of some of the way the night has gone in relation to the share of the vote that Labour has got. That's a warning, isn't it, to the party, despite the huge majority that it has?
Of course it is a warning to the party, but I have to say, I started watching what it seems like years ago when Wes Streeton was in the studio with you. I have to say, I think that trying to find the sort of difficult story for the Labour Party, there is a difficult story to tell in Birmingham, and people like me are going to have to work incredibly hard, which I'm more than happy to do, to make sure that my community feels loved and trusted again. But the fact of the matter is my constituents will be way better off under a Labour government, just like I was growing up there. And to be honest, I think that's the story that I will be taking out to them. But we have to prove that. So the issue, there's all sorts of things that the Labour Party is going to have to do. But the biggest one is we're going to actually have to start saying things that can actually be delivered and then delivering them. And I very much look forward to that work.
All right. Jess Phillips in Birmingham Yardley, a win is a win. Thank you.
A win is a win, but the performance of a small party there nearly knocked her out of her seat. And it's worth reflecting tonight. We think that the smaller parties, when you put it together, have actually got combined their biggest ever share in a UK general election. So we're checking those numbers add up in that way carefully. But it looks like the smaller parties have received their highest ever share in a UK election, which is something of a landmark moment. One of those parties doing very well is the Liberal Democrats. And we can show you some of their gains. Harrogate, Eastleigh, Chelmsford, Cheltenham, Carshalton, Hazel Grove, Torbay, so the southeast, southwest and parts of the north of England. And we're going to show you some more on the screen of where they've been victorious tonight. Daisy Cooper, the deputy leader, is here. Well, I was about to say, how do you feel? And then you crack open this massive grin before I even get my question out.
Yeah, we're feeling really good. I mean, I was here a few hours ago, shortly after the exit poll, saying that it looked as though if the exit poll had been correct, it looked like it could be, a once-in-a-century result. And now we can see what the results are, and it's a record-breaking result for the Liberal Democrats. We're really humbled that millions of people have put their trust and support in us, but we're also incredibly excited.
What are you going to do with it? Because your ambition was to get back to being the third biggest party. You've done that. You promised in the campaign, basically, you'd be more left-wing than Labour. But what are you actually going to do with this newfound power and profile in the House of Commons?
Well, the very first thing that we've already called for has been to call for an emergency health and social care budget. We put health and social care front and centre of our general election campaign. We talked numerous times about our pledges to boost GP numbers, to end dental deserts, to have mental health hubs in every community and to finally fix social care. And we want to see that emergency health and social care budget as soon as possible.
But you're not going to be able to push Labour to do those things on your own. They've got this whopping majority. So I wonder if in particular there is one thing, perhaps you've already had discussions with some people on the Labour benches about the kinds of areas where you might be able to put pressure on this government with a whopping majority actually to get things done.
We stood in the general election as our own party, on our own platform, with our own manifesto, and we set out our own priorities. We believe that with the numbers that we've won this evening, we are going to be a really strong force in British politics, and every single Liberal Democrat MP is going to add to the strength of our voice in Parliament to call for those reforms that we want to see in our NHS and social care.
And are the stunts over?
Oh, let's see.
Well, I just wanted, just before you came into the studio, we were seeing pictures of Ed Davey, doing some epic dad dancing. Has there been widespread Liberal Democrat dancing? I mean, dare I say, can we invite you to give us a few moves in the studio?
Probably not just yet, no. My local radio station did ask if there was a particular song I would play if I was going to have a dance in the kitchen, but I'll probably do that Saturday morning.
What was the song?
Oh, Basement Jaxx, Do Your Thing.
There you go.
All right. I wonder, though, Daisy, was there disquiet or a little bit of sort of unease when the suggestion of how you were going to run this campaign was sort of put forward to the wider elements within the party, that it was going to be stunts that were going to be the trigger to get into the policy? Was there a sense that, oh my God, what are we doing?
Well, the stunts were kept as a sort of highly coveted secret throughout the entire campaign, so even Ed didn't know what some of the stunts were until a few hours before they took place. But if you look back at the last Parliament, the stunts started with our different by-elections.
Yes.
And if you think about the very first one that we won in Chesham and Amersham, in True Blue Buckinghamshire, that was when we had the blue wall. We actually built a blue wall out of blue boxes and Ed knocked it down. And that introduced the concept of the blue wall into our conversation, into the British lexicon, really. And then we continued with those stunts. We had the stunt saying, we burst Boris's bubble. It was time for Rishi Sunak to go. Time was up, etc., etc. etc. And so it had already become sort of part of our campaigning strategy. It was working very well, so it was hardly surprising when we decided to do it again.
The trouble, though, is for the Lib Dems, in a sense, is that when you're getting bigger, and we've seen it in this campaign, when you've had scrutiny on some of the policies that you've put forward, not all of your sums add up, not all of the policies are deliverable. And if you're going to become, as you say, this bigger force in politics, a bigger voice in the House of Commons again, you're going to have to accept much more intense levels of scrutiny.
Oh, and we're very happy to have those levels of scrutiny. We do believe our manifesto is fully costed. We worked very intensely as the health and social care spokesperson. I can say my team worked with more than 300 different health organisations to develop our top pledges, and we worked on the sort of granular detail that sat underneath it. So we are very confident that the pledges that we put in our manifesto are pledges that could be delivered, and those will be what we're campaigning on.
OK, Daisy Cooper, thank you very much indeed for joining us, doing your thing in the studio, you might say.
Yes. It's been quite a story across the night and into the morning here. And one of the big stories has been the situation in Scotland. Let's get an update on all of that. Kirsty Wark is live in Glasgow. Hi, Kirsty.
Hello there, good morning to you. And I am joined by Neil Gray, the MSP Neil Gray, who's the Scottish Health Secretary. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm just going to say two different figures. You went into this election with 48 MPs. You're coming out of this election with 8. It's catastrophic for you.
It's a very poor night, a devastating night for the SNP, and I'm devastated for colleagues that have lost their seats and their staff who have lost their jobs. And
but you've also presumably let down the voters because voters felt they couldn't vote for you because you weren't delivering for them. And although independence itself was pretty firm and 48% to 50%, they clearly didn't trust you to deliver it.
And we've got to reflect on the message that's been given by the people of Scotland yesterday and the results that we're facing today. And we will do that. We will reflect, we'll rebuild and we'll refocus to make sure that we continue to deliver for the people of Scotland, and we'll work to earn and re-earn their trust, because this is a devastating night for the SNP. It's a horrendous position for us to be in, and we want to
And you take the blame.
Sure, of course, we have to.
Because let me just put your former leader, but two, said, Nicola Sturgeon, one of the questions of the SNP result tonight is whether they let themselves between two stools on the independence question, because I think, in my view, it wasn't really put front and centre. It was never followed through on a day-to-day basis in the campaign. That's one criticism. Another criticism is actually the other way around, and that is Joanna Cherry's criticism that Nicola Sturgeon's to blame for this result. So everybody's blaming each other, and Stephen Flynn saying there has to be some kind of bearing of the soul in all this, but what will the bearing of the soul achieve?
Well, of course there has to be soul searching. There has to be soul searching. I don't want there to be recriminations. What I'm interested in is learning the lessons of what has happened, not just over this election campaign, but in previous months where we have seen our support fall away. I want to make sure that we reflect on that, as we were doing as we were knocking doors, in my case in Adrian Shotts for Anam Kaiser, a very strong MP who served her constituents well, and there are examples of that across Scotland. We need to make sure that we come together, we reflect on what has been delivered to us as a message by the people of Scotland, and respond well.
But of course, it's a Westminster election, but of course the SNP is not judged really on how they do, and won't do again actually, at PMQs, where you as the third party got 2 questions. That's not what you've been judged on. In Scotland, you've been judged what you've been able to deliver in the way you govern. And the way you govern in Scotland, you've been there since 2007, and people feel that lots of things just aren't going very well. Not least a financial scandal, not least a transport system that's not working properly, not least a bottle return scheme, a gender recognition problem, a debate that was never really resolved, and more importantly for a lot of people, the fact that you cannot deliver on education to the extent that you promised to deliver. You promised to deliver high standards right across the educational spectrum, and that hasn't happened either.
And as I say, we need to reflect on that, and we need to reflect on what we're delivering in government, what we have sought to achieve through this campaign, which is to make sure that we do focus in on public service delivery. That has been the focal point of John Swinney's campaign, in terms of saying that we must not see a continuation of austerity. We must see an investment in public services to allow us to continue to make the change that we need to in our health service, in the reform that we need to see in our education system. And I'm confident that we can do that, but we will also be looking to hold the Labour Party to account in terms of the change that they say they will deliver, but the very little change that they've actually proposed in terms of their manifesto. They have committed to following the Tory spending plans, and that is incredibly significant for the ability for not just ourselves in Scotland, but for colleagues in Wales to be able to invest in the public services the way that we would want to, and that is a key issue for us.
Maybe there are just some things that it wasn't right to do, actually. Maybe it was some things like, you know, maybe you shouldn't actually have offered free prescriptions. Maybe that wasn't a priority. Maybe there are other things in the health service that you could have done. It's devolved. You were varying income tax in order to pay for public services. Maybe you didn't calibrate it properly.
Well, I think on two of those issues, I was getting very clear support for the free prescription position here in Scotland. And in terms of the issue around income tax, people have told us to take responsibility for our decisions in Scotland. We're absolutely doing that, which is why we're seeking to mitigate 14 years of austerity that has come from a Westminster government by raising £1.5 billion more in revenue here with the powers that we have in order to invest in our public services. Imagine where we would be without that investment, and that's why we need to see an end to austerity elsewhere in the UK as well.
Neil Gray, thank you very much indeed.
Kirsty, thank you. The SNP share of the vote in Scotland down to 30%.
20% lower than, I think, in the 2015 election. Incredible. Yeah. And the two parties, the SNP and the Conservatives, who set off on constitutional adventures, have both been hammered in the general election of 2024. However, someone else who has been humbled in the last hour at the hands of the voters is the former Prime Minister, Liz Truss. Now, she did not speak on stage at the declaration where she lost her seat, losing her enormous majority. However, our colleague Ros Atkins did manage to catch up with her before she left the count.
Do you take responsibility for what's happened to the Conservatives this evening because of what happened when you were Prime Minister?
I think the issue we've faced as Conservatives is we haven't delivered sufficiently on the policies people want. And that means keeping taxes low, but also particularly on reducing immigration. And I think that's been a crucial issue here in South West Norfolk. That was the number one issue that people raised on the doorstep with me.
But do you accept that? But do you accept that first as a cabinet minister and then for a brief time as Prime Minister, you were part of the people in power who were overseeing those things not being delivered?
I agree I was part of that. That's absolutely true. But during our 14 years in power, unfortunately, we did not do enough to take on the legacy we'd been left, in particular things like the Human Rights Act that made it very difficult for us to deport illegal immigrants. And that is one of the reasons I think we've ended up in the situation we are now. Thank you very much.
Do you still want to stay in Conservative politics?
I've got a lot to think about. It's been a very, very hectic few weeks. I haven't slept last night, so give me a bit of time, but I will definitely talk to you again when I've got the opportunity.
One more question. Would you like to say sorry to the people of Norfolk because they clearly feel a little left down by you?
Your campaign,
Ms. Truss.
Liz Truss, the former Prime Minister, there saying, I agree, I was part of the problem, but she was pointing the finger of blame at the inheritance that the Conservatives got way back in 2010 for having been part of the problem. But she said, we didn't keep our promises, we didn't do enough. But I think, Clive, there'll be lots of Conservatives watching that and seeing her on television and pointing the finger of blame very closely in her direction.
Yeah. She says she's got a lot to think about as well. So it'll be interesting to see what she does moving forward. But what about the story of the night? Jeremy Vine has been periodically bringing us up to date, and he's now in Downing Street. Hi, Jeremy.
Well, and Dawn has arrived here as well. What about that? So, yeah, we've got our wedge here of these Conservative hexagons and some SNP as well. These are Labour's top 300 targets arranged by order of marginality. So as you go down Downing Street, the hexagons get higher, meaning the seats are safer. And I'm going to do a thing now where we can translate the colours from 2019, which is what we're looking at now, into the new colours and see just how much damage Labour did. So have a look here and let's see what happens. So you'll see this wave now rippling down Downing Street. There it comes. And now we have the 2024 result. If any are flashing, by the way, it's because we're still waiting. So the smallest majority is down this end. And you see Labour have pretty much cleaned up here, with two exceptions, actually. Keighley stays blue. And, of course, this is Chingford and Woodford Green, Ian Duncan Smith's seat, who, amazingly, Mr Duncan Smith managed to keep his seat despite it being a very, very vulnerable one. As we get further down, we can see there's a large red block around here. That is Whitehaven and Workington. You'll remember Workington Man. It was a big Boris Johnson thing, the so-called Red Wall the Conservatives were trying to smash down. That was back in 2019. That had a Conservative majority of 2,144. Look how high this hexagon is now. It's a Labour majority of 13,286. As I say, any flashing seat is still a forecast. We head down to the end. And here's what you see about the end point, is almost all the Tory seats have had their majorities reduced. So there's nothing as high as it was. A lot of them are now unsafe. They're vulnerable, despite having been the safer ones at this end. That one that's sort of turquoise in the corner just down there is Clacton. So that was a very safe Tory seat, translated by Nigel Farage into a safe-ish Reform seat. But you're looking here at the damage done to the Conservative Party's holding of seats and the amount of incursion that Labour has done all the way down this line. And I'll just add one thing, which is that you don't really see SNP yellow here because they took those seats as well. Back to you.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Stay with us, much more coming up. But this is Election 2024 and it's time for a roundup of all the news where you are.
Good morning and welcome to BBC London's General Election Special. I'm Laxmi Gopal. Labour have made significant gains across London. The Liberal Democrats have increased their number of MPs in South West London, while the Conservatives have clung on to 9 seats. As it stands, with just one more seat to declare in the capital, Labour have 58, the Conservatives have 9 and the Lib Dems have 6. Jeremy Corbyn also won as an independent in Islington North. Our political correspondent Carl Mercer has more.
A winning welcome for a winning leader. Keir Starmer seeing the country and the capital go a wider spread of red. They won in former Conservative heartlands, like here in Beckenham.
Just really pleased, really proud of the campaign that we've run. Absolutely delighted at this historic moment. This is the first time Labour have ever won a Liberal constituency.
There were victories too in neighbouring Bexleyheath and in Westminster.
I'm Rachel Blake and I'm Cities of London and Westminster MP. How does it feel to say that? That's the first time I've said it, so I take the responsibility very seriously, so I'm very happy. It's been an incredible campaign and it's been a really exciting night for Labour.
They won as well in Finchley and Golders Green, in Chipping Barnet, in Kensington and in Chelsea and Fulham, where former Minister for London Greg Hands lost his seat. There was defeat, though, to their former leader, Jeremy Corbyn, who easily won Islington North, the seat he's represented for more than 40 years.
We have shown what kinder, gentler, more sensible, more inclusive politics can bring about. I couldn't be more proud of my constituency than I am tonight. I'm proud of our team that brought this result. Thank you very much, Islington North, for the result that we've achieved tonight. Thank you.
The Lib Dems were celebrating a good night in the capital, building once again in their strongholds in the south-west and picking up Wimbledon for the first time.
What I remember is losing in 2019. That's the thing I remember, and that spurred us on for 5 years.
Well, I'm from a very working class background. Dad's a scaffolder, mum's a cleaner. Grew up in a council house. They're still council tenants to this day, and I don't see enough of that in politics. I think the public don't see enough of that in politics as well, and I feel like I want to go in there and be a voice for families like mine.
The Conservatives did hold on to some seats they thought they might lose, here in Harrow East and in Chingford, where their former leader Ian Duncan Smith won.
17,281.
The Labour vote split after they replaced their candidate just weeks before the election.
I know that we're going to be so disappointed to have Ian Duncan Smith all over again and be disappointed knowing that we could have won if it hadn't been for the lies, if it hadn't been for what Labour Party did to me.
Why do you think Conservatives aren't connecting with Londoners?
Well, I think the trouble is we've forgotten about working
for people in the communities. I've worked relentlessly for people here. My record of success, from getting a new hospital built right the way through to getting rid of antisocial behaviour, fighting about the closure of the Broadmead Road Bridge, these are everyday issues for people here, and it's important therefore that people, MPs, focus on that.
So the new Prime Minister is a London MP and a Labour one. During May's mayoral campaign, Sadiq Khan said that would mean a better deal for the capital. His opponent back then says now we'll see if that's true.
Sadiq Khan has spent his entire time blaming the Conservative government that he can't do this, he can't do that. Well, he won't have anybody to blame, although I suspect he'll still try.
Well, I think Keir's right to talk about a long-term plan. I think he needs 2 terms. I'll be working with him straight away. I've already been in touch with him today. I'll make sure that, you know, with a Labour government, me as the mayor is working as closely with them as possible.
Now we'll be able to find out. Labour is as strong in London as it has ever been and has a national government with a huge majority. Carl Mercer, BBC London.
Well, now let's go live to our political editor, Tim Donovan. Tim, what's the latest?
Packing up here in Chelsea and Fulham. The MP here was Minister for London, Greg Hands. During the campaign, he'd been one of those people to say vocally, Labour are going to win a supermajority. It was perceived as trying to suppress the vote, and hopefully voters around here would keep him on as a presence of scrutiny, if you like, for a Labour mayor, a Labour government, a Labour council. But he lost here by 152 votes.
Well, I think it was always going to be a difficult race here in Chelsea and Fulham. You know, the notional majority was, I think, about 8,000, and I think it put it into what Geoffrey Boycott would have said, the corridor of uncertainty.
The Conservatives now hold, currently, 9 seats in London. That will be their worst record. There's one more, Hendon, about to come back, but it's either way going to be the lowest number of MPs they've had.
Thank you. Elsewhere in our region, in Surrey, the Conservatives have held on to Godalming and Ash, Jeremy Hunt's seat. They've also held East Surrey, while the Lib Dems made gains in Surrey Heath, Woking, Guildford and Esher and Walton. In Hertfordshire, Grant Shapps lost his seat to Labour. They also took the seat of Hemel Hempstead, and Harpenden and Berkhamsted has gone from Conservative to Lib Dem, while the Tories held on to Hertsmere. In Essex, Labour took the Thurrock seat from the Conservatives. They also won both constituencies in Southend and one in Harlow. The Conservatives held on to Basildon and Brentford. BBC London will keep you up to date with the latest throughout the day. Eddie Nestor is live on BBC Radio London through to 10 o'clock this morning. There he is now. And to find the specific results for where you live, you can head to the BBC News website. Now to join the rest of the team for more election coverage.
Hello there, welcome back to our coverage of the 2024 election. We're expecting Rishi Sunak to turn up at Conservative Party headquarters quite soon, so that could be interesting.
Could be very interesting.
And yeah, we'll bring you that as soon as we get it.
And if you are just beginning your day, rather than staying up with us all night, then Labour has won an absolutely whopping victory in the general election. Rishi Sunak will, in the next few hours, be on his way out of Downing Street as Prime Minister for the last time. And probably around lunchtime, Sir Keir Starmer will be on his way in. An astonishing turnaround for Labour after that terrible result in 2019. So let's imagine what might now be going on behind closed doors in Downing Street, in government, as they get ready for this new administration to arrive. Helen McNamara is with us, who used to be the second most senior civil servant in the land. Now, Helen, you know what it's like behind the big black shiny door when the new boss is about to arrive. So just paint a picture for it. Is everybody panicking, frantic, or actually if they got lots of folders and everything's all organised?
I'm very sure there'll be no panicking. Civil service is very, very good at keeping its cool in these situations. But it's an incredibly emotional and tense time, because the first thing you've got to do is see off the outgoing Prime Minister with respect and kindness, and that'll be somebody that you've worked with quite closely. So there's all of that to deal with first, and then you stand together, really, in number 10, and you wait while the outgoing Prime Minister and the incoming Prime Minister are at the palace. And then you see the new boss in. So he or she stands in the street outside, makes their speech, turns round, walks through the door, is clapped in by the team. And then if you're, the Cabinet Secretary or the Prime Minister's top team, you follow them into the Cabinet room, and straight away you're on to appointing the Cabinet and getting on with the business of governing.
And so as they walk through that door, their life changes and the country's life changes too. But you were there under Boris Johnson and also in Rishi Sunak. You worked closely, seen him up close. How do you think he will be handling this moment? You know, he's got a reputation as being very businesslike, very managerial, very sort of methodical. But up close, how do you reckon he'll be handling this moment?
Well, this must be hard for him, right? And he's a very dignified and respectful person. But I mean, seeing what he's had to go through this evening and just this whole experience is a really big moment. I'm really sure, having worked closely with him, he'll be taking the time to say thank you to his team. I think he's doing that now with the Conservative Party. I'm sure he'll do that in Downing Street with the staff that have worked with him then.
What about the business of governing before he's actually got his ministers and stuff in place? Because we know that there's a NATO summit coming up, for instance. I mean, how much preparation would he get in order to deal with all that? How much help would he get to deal with those things that are in his in-train now before he's really actually properly settled in?
I mean, it's one of the extraordinary things about becoming Prime Minister is the in-tray you have on going into the job. The business of governing has been going on all the time, and you do have to get your head into and around all of these difficult and complicated issues. Foreign policy is one of the very first things a Prime Minister has to do. So he's been spending the last few weeks talking about domestic policy and all the things that his government will deliver. Actually, many of his first few days will be talking to foreign leaders. They'll be getting ready for the summit, as you say. But the civil service is very used to preparing people for these things and will have a very, very well-oiled machine ready to serve him.
And one of the interesting things about Keir Starmer's preparation is it's quite some time since he appointed a woman called Sue Gray. You might know Sue Gray's name for being the official who conducted the report into Partygate, who published that report, which was part of the finale of Boris Johnson's time in office. Helen, you will know Sue Gray. She's going to be an incredibly powerful figure. All our viewers this morning might have to get used to hearing a bit about her. What's she like, and is she really the kind of person who you think, actually, if you wanted somebody in charge of government, making it all smooth, making it work, that would be who it was? Because she's got a reputation for being a bit fearsome.
I mean, Keir Starmer has an amazing advantage in having Sue Gray in his team, in the same way that Tony Blair had Jonathan Powell. So much as many of his political team won't even have been in Downing Street before, in Sue he's got someone who's deeply familiar with the corridors of power and how it will all work. Some of the dark corners and some of the light ones too, Laura. I think that, you know, she will be able to help him and his new team navigate how to do things very well.
OK, Helen McNamara, thanks so much for being with us.
OK, it's been a night of shocks, it's been a night of surprises and high drama. Rita has some of the highlights of what's been a very, very eventful night.
Highlights, depending on your stance, I suppose, Clive. Really, really low points for a lot of people. We've got 9 seats left to declare, so we're nearly there. And as Clive said, there have been some really, really outstanding moments in this night. Possibly chief among them is the loss by a former Prime Minister of her seat, Liz Truss, losing in southwest Norfolk. She had a majority of 24,000, over 24,000, and she lost her seat to the Labour Party. Truly remarkable for somebody who was in Downing Street, 2 years ago. Other notable names who've lost their seats. Grant Shapps, Defence Secretary, has held various cabinet positions over the last few years. He's out in Welwyn Hatfield. Gillian Keegan, Education Secretary, as was. She's out in Chichester. That's a Liberal Democrat gain from the Conservatives. I've got more and more of these. Penny Mordaunt, Leader of the House of Commons, she lost her seat to Labour in Portsmouth. Michelle Donnellan, Science Secretary, she's lost her Wiltshire seat to the Lib Dems. And Johnny Mercer, Veterans Minister, has lost his Plymouth Moorview seat to Labour. I've got a few more to bring you as well. It really has been a shockingly brutal night for the Conservatives. Jacob Rees-Mogg, arch-Brexiter, losing his seat to Labour in North East Somerset. Therese Coffey, who for a brief period of time was Deputy Prime Minister to Liz Truss. She's lost her seat in Suffolk Coastal. And Liam Fox, a very senior figure on the Tory right for many years, has lost his seat in North Somerset. That is a Labour gain from the Conservatives. I want to show you one more thing which shows you the shape of the vote share over this election. It is an estimate, and I say an estimate because there are still a few seats to be counted. But this is where we are landing on as our 2024 estimate in terms of overall share of the vote, and that is Labour on 35%, the Conservatives on 24%, the Lib Dems on 13%, and others, that'll include Reform and the Greens, on 2%. I don't want to give you an enormous history lesson at this point in the morning, but if you look at the lines going back, you will see that Labour's share of the vote, despite having this enormous majority, this landslide victory, it's actually relatively low. And in fact, I can tell you it is 5 percentage points lower than what Jeremy Corbyn got in 2019, and it is the lowest share of the vote of any single governing party. So how has that happened? Not in a position to tell you, and I'm sure treatises are going to be written about this, but it is a very interesting fact about their victory. And the Conservatives are on their worst performance ever.
All right, Reeta, thank you for that. A generation of Conservative politicians. Liam Fox, Therese Coffey, Liz Truss and Steve Baker. We started the night with Steve Baker here in the studio, and it's good of you to come back, Steve, because we were giving you less than 1% chance of surviving in Wickham. You told us that you thought you'd squeaked it, but you didn't.
Well, no, I think I ranged it and said I might have lost handsomely or possibly squeaked it. So what I expected to happen was for me to maintain my British Muslim voters, which is I think I probably did, and for Labour to lose theirs. But the reality is the independent Gaza candidates underperformed compared to my expectations, and so Labour have won with the help of Reform. But look, today really I just feel terribly sad for our country because Labour are going to be a disaster. I'm happy to talk about that. I'm very sad for the probably 1,000 parliamentary staffers who will now lose their jobs, who don't deserve to, including my own, who have diligently served the people of Wickham, given their all to look after people in all kinds of ways. They don't deserve to lose their jobs, and I'll commend them to any employer. But I'll be honest, for myself, I wanted to win this. I fought it to win. I'm incredibly proud of the campaign we had. I'm proud of my campaign manager. But for me personally, thank God I'm free. It's over, and I'm glad.
You're glad? Explain that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've been doing this for duty, and it has been I would invite you to become a Member of Parliament. Laura, of course, kindly followed me around with a camera for a long period and have a look at inside the Brexit storm. But look, being a Member of Parliament is long hours, a lot of abuse. My house is now for like Fort Knox. And, enough's enough. And I would have been glad to continue and serve the people of Wickham. It was often a joy to do my duty. But I'm going to be honest with people. Members of Parliament time and again say, what an honour. Well, it was an honour. It was an honour. But my goodness, it's good to have it behind me. And I will not be coming back. You can have that as an exclusive.
Well, that is rather a depressing way to end the interview, Steve. Thank you for that. Yeah, there you go, making it clear that he's now free.
It's interesting, though, because lots of MPs actually through this campaign have sometimes talked privately, sometimes a little bit publicly about how tough it's been, some of the abuse they've encountered, some of the threats there have been, also to their families, which, of course, is not something that anybody involved in this process would want to see. Politicians have great privilege, but also it is not an easy life. Right, someone who's been working hard for all of us, though, tonight, of course, is Jeremy Vine. Jeremy, take us inside the House of Commons to show us what it might look like.
Here we are. To break it to you, it's not a real House of Commons. It's all just, virtual. But let's have a look at the numbers.
I thought you were going to be in there.
Oh, listen. I know it's a surprise. Let's do the numbers here. Labour 413. Bit of forecasting still because there are 9 seats or so to go. Then on the opposition benches with plenty of room to stretch out, the Conservatives on 122. Let's have a look at the other parties then. Liberal Democrats, what a night, 71. What an incredible night, best in the history of their party. SNP crushed, reduced to 10. Reform on 4. The Greens on 4, great result for them. Plaid Cymru in Wales on 4, also a good result for them. And then we have the others, including the Northern Ireland parties and Jeremy Corbyn, etc., on 22. Now, before I go, I must pay tribute, as I know Clive and Laura, you will want to our wonderful colleague, Sir John Curtice, because I'll just remind you what he told us right at the start of the evening. What did he say Labour would get? 410. 413 it is. What did he say the Conservatives would get? He said 131. They're on 122. He had the Lib Dems on 61. That was close. SNP, he said 10, bang on. Plaid Cymru 4. Greens on 2, and he did say, when he said Reform 13, he said, that's the one I'm most worried about. So, John, if you're listening, you're a genius, and it's a pleasure to work with you. And
John,
there's the actual results so far as we know at this point.
He's listening.
Thanks, Jeremy. Well,
and
John,
he's grinning.
Well, John is most certainly listening to that, allowing himself to crack a smile after all of that hard work. And the headlines really here, John: devastated SNP, delighted Reform, devastated Tories, and the jubilant Labour Party. What are your closing reflections after this really historic evening of politics as it's unfolded?
Well, first of all, before I directly answer your question, I need to give tribute to all of my colleagues who've worked on this exit poll. It was actually a lot of hard work yesterday. It was probably the most difficult election to model. I guess, you know, as with all of these things, yes, we worked hard and perhaps we demonstrated a bit of science, but it was probably a bit of luck there as well. To come back to your question, well, my reflection is that this is essentially an election that the Conservatives lost. That is the big movement in this campaign. Their support is down by around 21 points. But the electorate, in expressing their dislike of the Conservatives, their wish to get rid of them, have cast their favours across many seas. Yes, the Labour Party have been the principal beneficiaries in terms of seats, but they're not the principal beneficiaries in terms of votes. Actually, once you take Scotland out of the equation, where Labour undoubtedly did put on a spectacular increase in their support, more or less doubling their support. In England, hardly up at all. In Wales, actually down. This was the Conservatives going down that, for the most part, enabled Labour to get where they are, although what Labour were able to do was to advance, but where they did advance, they advanced in places where they were challenging the Conservatives, because voters were wanting to use Labour in those places to get rid of the Conservatives. But equally, Liberal Democrats, who now have almost got their proportionate share of seats, which is utterly remarkable, they equally benefited when the Conservatives, they were challenging the Conservatives, and with the Conservative vote falling away more heavily in places where they were previously strongest, Labour and Liberal Democrats really profited. But a lot of the damage, the foundations of Conservative support and prospects in this election were undermined by Reform. They're going to run at about 15%. They've only got 4 seats, but for the fact that so many 2019 Tory voters moved to Reform, the position of the Conservatives this morning would have looked an awful lot better. Being in government is difficult, and that's not only a problem for the Conservatives, it was also a problem for the SNP, who in the end did end up with around 10 seats, just only around 30% of the vote in Scotland, and that now leaves them a much diminished force at Westminster. We do now have Reform with 4 MPs. That's now a potential platform for Nigel Farage to use. But the Greens also, they've got their best performance ever, and they've got 4 seats. We are going to have, in a sense, rather than a House of Commons, where we normally expect one big party and another big party on the side, then a few fringe parties, we're going to have one big party on one side and lots of other parties of varying sizes, but of innumerable number on the other side. And to that extent, at least, it's going to be a more fragmented House of Commons, and we'll have to see who managed to take advantage of that situation.
All right, Professor Sir John Curtice, thanks to you and your team for, well, frankly, getting it right. Thank you.
And through the day on BBC News, on radio, TV, online and everywhere, of course, there'll be more analysis from John, maybe after a couple of hours of kip. But we're shortly going to be leaving you in the very, very capable hands of Sophie Rayworth and John Kay. There they are, ready to go. You look absolutely raring to go, Sophie. Are you ready? It's going to be a big day.
What a night you have had, and what a day we have ahead of us, and we are going to be bringing it all to you live. The moment that we see Rishi Sunak return to Downing Street for the last time and then leave when he tenders his resignation to the King, we will be following all of that live, and of course the moment when Sir Keir Starmer makes that same journey to the palace and becomes the new Prime Minister for the United Kingdom. We will bring it all to you live.
in this terrible weather, because it's all rather familiar, isn't it? Back to the day when Rishi Sunak called this election. It is pouring down here in Westminster today. So Carol Kirkwood will also be with us a bit later to tell us whether he might need an umbrella this time. I think Laura's heading to Downing Street as well a bit later, so you might need an umbrella too. It really is chucking it down, but MPs will be turning up here today, some of them for the first time. Some losing candidates will be turning up as well, coming to talk to us. The party headquarters are nearby. Everyone is going to be focused on this one area of London today.
In fact, we've got Sir Ed Davey, who will be joining us just after 8 o'clock, after quite an extraordinary night for the Liberal Democrats.
Clive, how are you feeling? Have you finished the
I'm
coffee?
still awake, man.
And if you haven't,
I'm still awake.
You made it out.
Still going. I've been nicking Laura's sweets and nuts, so that's kept me going. But what a night it's been of drama. You know, you have Labour with an incredible majority, but on such a low vote share. Absolutely astonishing. And then, of course, a former Prime Minister losing her seat, Liz Truss. It's been an astonishing night and a privilege to be part of the coverage here with some wonderful colleagues, getting these results out and keeping the public informed. It's been amazing.
You say all the right things. Chris, brief final word from you before we hand to John and Sophie.
We've had a decade of convulsions in politics, haven't we, in British politics, going back to the independence referendum in Scotland, through the Brexit years, the coalition years, the Conservative small majorities, that whopping majority for Boris Johnson, and then a whopping majority on stilts now for Keir Starmer. Quite extraordinary, the capacity of British politics to continue to surprise.
And in terms of that volatility, it does seem maybe the volatility is the new normal, right? Everybody can move around all the time. Nothing is permanent.
The evidence substantiates that precisely, doesn't it? In this election, in the previous election, and therefore it's not unreasonable to imagine that that might continue. And so whilst Keir Starmer will arrive in Downing Street with a smile on his face and a whopping majority behind him, he'll be very conscious of that, undoubtedly.
Chris, briefly, what do you think the next 100 days are going to bring?
It's going to be busy for folk like me, I suspect, and indeed for those going into government. I think what we'll see from Keir Starmer in Downing Street in a couple of hours is a business-like manner and tone. A, because that's his character. B, because he thinks that's the nature of the economic and political inheritance that he's taking on. And C, because I think a nod to the fact that in that share of the vote, considering the scale of Labour's numerical victory in seats, it's pretty modest. So I think there'll be an acknowledgement of that tacitly, that accepts that, yes, he has a whopping majority of the seats, but 30-odd%, 35%-ish of the vote. And then from then, his challenge in the next couple of months will be able to try to show a change in the tone of politics. That's what he's promising. But then very quickly, people want to see some sort of delivery, and that'll be difficult, because a big majority doesn't make some of those big challenges all that much easier. And yet, potentially, as we close, we should just underline an incredible turnaround for the Labour Party from where they were. Whopping, colossal. Every superlative is deserving of throwing out that description, no doubt about it.
Okay. Yeah, indeed, for his party. What a job Keir Starmer has done. Well, thank you for being with us as the results have unfolded. Your votes have been counted and politicians' futures and the fate of the nation has been decided. We'd just like to thank everyone here for being with us all night. And that includes Jeremy Vine, of course, Reeta, who's been in the studio with us, Chris, of course, our political editor, and Sir John Curtice as well, Kirsty Wark, and everyone, all our reporters and guests from right around the country.
And of course, a big thank you to all of you who have watched all night. Later, we will bring you Sir Keir Starmer's journey to Buckingham Palace to accept the King's invitation to form a government. There will be huge challenges ahead. But today, our next Prime Minister will walk into Downing Street, only the 7th Labour Prime Minister in history, the leader of a new government, the start of a new chapter for his party, and the beginning of a new era for us all. Thank you for being with us. Goodbye. And as Big Ben strikes 10, the exit poll is predicting a Labour landslide.
Sir Keir Starmer will become Prime Minister with a majority of around 170 seats.
Blimey, just take a look and take in those numbers. The Conservative Party, so often an election-winning machine, looks pulverised tonight.
I think that an electoral meteor has now struck planet Earth.
It is going to be quite the night.
We're looking for the first count.
We are.
We need the first count. And we're hoping that it's going to be one of these counts. We're just going to cut in there because we've got a declaration.
18,837.
How would you sum up the evening?
There is no way of describing this as anything other than a bad night for the Conservative Party.
Laura, I'm fed up with performance art politics. I've watched colleagues in the Conservative Party strike poses, write inflammatory op-eds and say stupid things. I've had enough of it.
Grant Shapps there, looking really quite shaken by what has happened to him tonight.
Some of the most familiar faces that we've been seeing, certainly over the last Parliament, are gone. The former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom has lost her seat.
One has to say, this does look like an election that the Conservatives have lost, and have lost primarily because of the votes they have lost to reform.
Believe me, folks, this is just the first step of something that is going to stun all of you.
This effectively is the 2024 election result here. All of those seats, blue in England, yellow in Scotland, replaced by Labour red.
Labour gains, Labour gains, Labour gains.
18,976. You have voted. It is now time for us to deliver.
I don't know if you could tell, but I've rather enjoyed this campaign.
We're going to go to Adrian Ramsey, co-leader of the Greens, smiling very broadly there. It's been a good night.
That Douglas Alexander is duly elected.
James, this is a disaster for the SNP, isn't it?
It's a total